I never thought I would end up in this place, standing in the middle of my own home, questioning everything I've ever known about myself, about my family. It's a strange thing how life can get so loud, and yet you become so numb to it. You keep pushing forward, doing what's expected of you, and before you know it, years have gone by and you're still stuck in the same loop. That's where I was at 32, married to my routine, my job, and the role I had been given as the good daughter. But deep down, I could feel it, this gnawing sensation that something had to change. And when I hired the cleaning lady, that was my first tiny step toward breaking free. I just didn't know it yet. Growing up in a perfect little suburban house, everything looked good on the outside. You know the type: big white house with the neatly trimmed lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, and the usual family gatherings that were just the right kind of normal. But as a kid, I always felt like an outsider in my own home. My parents were loving, yes, but they were also overbearing in ways that suffocated me. They had a very clear idea of what my life should look like, and from the moment I could talk, I could tell they were determined to mold me into the perfect daughter, the perfect future wife, the perfect everything. There was no room for mistakes, no room for deviation from their carefully laid plans. Every decision, from what college I went to what job I took, was made with their approval, or at least I was made to feel like it was. It was exhausting, really. I can still hear my father's voice in my head, his steady, controlled tone reminding me to act like a lady or to always put family first. I never felt like I had any say in my own life. It was as if I was living for someone else's expectations. I got good at pretending. The best actress, really. I played the part of the dutiful daughter who smiled, nodded, and did everything that was asked of her, even when it felt like I was suffocating beneath the weight of their expectations. I buried my true self so deep inside that I couldn't even hear my own voice anymore. At work, it was much the same. A 9-to-5 job that I'd been in for the past 5 years. The people were fine, the work was easy enough, but there was no passion, no fire in what I did. It was just a means to an end, another box to check off. Every day felt the same. I would get up, put on the same clothes, sit in the same cubicle, and stare at the same computer screen, wondering if this was it. If this was really all life had to offer. My home was the one place where I should have felt at ease, but even there, the walls seemed to close in on me. My parents, despite their constant presence, were hardly ever home. My dad was always working, and my mom, well, she was always busy with something. My younger brother, Jacob, was never home either, off chasing whatever he thought was more exciting than being around the family. For a long time, I thought the silence was normal. But after a while, the silence became suffocating. The house, once filled with the sounds of family dinners and laughter, was now empty more often than not. One day, I found myself in a particularly dark place. I had spent yet another evening in the house, alone, with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator to keep me company. My thoughts had begun to spiral, and I felt the weight of my life pressing down on me. That's when I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a cleaning lady. It seemed like the smallest thing, nothing significant in the grand scheme of things, but for me, it was a declaration of independence. I didn't need anyone's permission. It wasn't about the house needing to be cleaned. No, it was about me doing something for myself, something that wasn't dictated by anyone else. I'd be the one to make the decision. It was something so simple, yet it felt like a victory. For once, I could do something that was mine, something just for me. Her name was Marta, and when I first met her, she struck me as calm and unassuming. She had this serene presence about her, like she was a person who had seen a lot and wasn't easily ruffled. She was in her late 40s, with soft features and a gentle smile. Her voice was low, almost soothing. I hired her through a service, and she came once a week on Tuesdays when the house was empty. The first time she came to clean, I was at work, so I didn't think much of it. I told myself I'd just come home to a clean house and maybe feel a little lighter, but I wasn't expecting much more than that. I wasn't prepared for the way she made me feel. As strange as it sounds, the first time I walked into the house after Marta had finished, it felt different. It was more than just a clean house. There was something else in the air, something I couldn't quite place. I tried to ignore the feeling. After all, I had hired her to clean, not to make me feel anything. But as the weeks went by, something about Marta's presence started to stir something inside me. Maybe it was the way she moved through the house, her movements purposeful but almost too careful, like she was trying to avoid disturbing something unseen. Or maybe it was the way she would glance around, as if checking the corners of rooms, peering into spaces she couldn't have known about. I would catch her eyes scanning the hallways, looking over her shoulder when she thought no one was watching. It unsettled me, but I couldn't pinpoint why. As I got to know her a little better, I began to wonder if there was something more to Marta than just a cleaning lady. She seemed almost too observant, too aware of things that I didn't remember ever telling her. It wasn't anything specific, just little comments here and there that made me question whether she knew more than she let on. And yet, every time I tried to ask her anything, she would smile softly and change the subject. She was polite, professional, but always distant. It made me uncomfortable, but at the same time, I found myself oddly drawn to her. The real turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks into Marta's visits. I was at work, finishing up some paperwork, when I saw her name pop up on my phone. At first, I didn't think anything of it. She was calling, as usual, to confirm her next visit, but when I picked up, her voice was different. It was tight, frantic. "There's someone in your house," she said. I froze, my heart raced as I tried to make sense of her words. "What do you mean, someone's in my house?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. I don't know," Marta stammered. "I heard something. I thought you were home, but I'm sure I heard footsteps. Someone's here. Please come home." My mind was already racing. There had been no one else in the house, I was sure of it, but the panic in her voice was unmistakable. "Marta, are you sure? Are you sure it's not just—" "No," she interrupted, her voice shaking now. "It's not just me. There's someone in your house." I hung up the phone, heart hammering in my chest. I sat frozen for a few moments after the call, my phone still pressed to my ear, the line now empty. The quiet seemed louder, more suffocating than ever before. I had to get home. I wasn't sure what to think or even what to feel, but the weight of Marta's words was pulling me back to my house, to whatever it was that she had sensed. Was she just being paranoid? Or was there something more? It was impossible to shake the unease that had settled in my stomach. I grabbed my purse, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. The drive felt like it took forever, even though it was only a few minutes from my office to my house. The road stretched out in front of me, and all I could think about was what might be waiting for me when I walked through the door. I had lived in that house for years, surrounded by my family, and yet in that moment, it felt unfamiliar, alien almost. The longer the drive, the more my mind spiraled. What if there really was someone in there? What if Marta wasn't just overreacting? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was barely able to control my breathing. I couldn't figure out what to expect. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably nothing. Marta had been there alone, maybe she had misheard something. But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. There was something off about her voice, something I couldn't ignore. I rushed inside, the house eerily silent. It looked the same as when I had left this morning, nothing out of place, nothing suggesting that anyone had been there. The floor was clean, the kitchen spotless, the rooms tidy. It was exactly what I'd expect after a visit from Marta. But then I stopped in the hallway. A faint smell of perfume lingered in the air, something floral, but not the one I used. I hadn't even noticed it until now. It was subtle, barely detectable, but it was there. I stood still for a moment, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe it was a scent that had stuck to Marta's clothes, or something she had sprayed to make the house smell nicer. But then my eyes fell on the living room, and the knot in my stomach tightened. The couch cushions were slightly askew, as if someone had been sitting there, but I knew I hadn't been. I hadn't even been home yet. And as I walked further into the room, I noticed something else, something small but unsettling. A drawer in the coffee table was left ajar. I had never left it like that. It wasn't a big thing, not enough to make me panic, but it was a sign. A sign that someone had been here, or at least had touched things I hadn't expected. I felt my pulse quicken, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Was Marta right? I walked cautiously through the house, moving room to room, half expecting to find someone hiding in a closet or behind the curtains. But everything was still. The house was quiet. The house was normal. It had to be. Yet the unsettling feeling gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. As I walked into the kitchen, I realized I wasn't alone in the house. The air seemed heavier, more oppressive. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I tried to steady myself, to convince myself that I was being irrational, but my mind kept circling back to Marta's call. There was someone in my house, she had said, but where were they now? I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 6, which meant Marta had finished her work hours ago. I should have expected that she would be gone by now. But why did her voice sound so desperate? Why had she insisted so strongly that there was someone here? I didn't want to admit it, but I couldn't stop thinking that there was something I wasn't seeing. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my messages, looking for anything that might explain the situation. But there was nothing from my family. I thought about calling my parents, about telling them what had happened, but I hesitated. They would probably brush it off. They always brushed things off. They were too busy with their own lives to care about something as trivial as a cleaning lady's strange phone call. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. Maybe Marta had imagined it. Maybe she had gotten scared for no reason. I didn't want to panic. I didn't want to make things worse than they already were. But as I turned to head upstairs, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door to the guest bedroom was open. I was certain I had closed it this morning before I left. The guest room wasn't used often, except when my parents visited, which hadn't happened in months. I walked toward it cautiously, trying to ignore the knot tightening in my chest. When I reached the door, I hesitated before pushing it open. Everything was still. The bed was made. The room was clean, but something felt wrong. It was the same feeling that had settled in me when I first walked in, this oppressive, heavy silence, like the room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I let out a shaky breath and closed the door behind me, my head spinning with questions. What was going on? Why did Marta feel the need to call me? And why did I feel like there was something I was missing, something right in front of me that I couldn't see? I pulled my phone from my pocket again, debating whether or not to call Marta. But I stopped myself, my thumb hovering over the screen. What would I even say to her? What would she say to me? I didn't know if I trusted her entirely. There was something about the way she had acted that morning. Her behavior was unsettling, as if she knew more than she was letting on. Had she sensed something in the house that I had? I dialed her number, my hand trembling slightly as I held the phone to my ear. The line rang twice before she picked up. "Emma?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost distant. "Marta, it's me," I said, my voice unsteady. You said there was someone in the house. I don't understand, I don't see anything." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Marta taking a deep breath. "I don't know how to explain it," she said, her voice shaky. "I felt it, Emma. It was like someone was here, like I wasn't alone. I don't know if I was imagining it, but I swear I heard footsteps. I thought you were home. I thought you were upstairs or somewhere nearby, but when I called out, there was no answer. It felt wrong." Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I wasn't sure what to make of them. Was she being truthful, or was she just afraid of something that wasn't there? "I don't know what to say," I replied. "I've been home for a while now, and everything seems fine. There's no one here." Marta's voice softened, a quiet edge of desperation creeping in. "Just be careful, Emma. Trust your instincts. Something isn't right. You have to be careful." The line went silent again, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, something deeper, that had me unsettled, but her warning echoed in my mind as I hung up. Something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. The days that followed Marta's call were a blur. I tried to convince myself that I had overreacted, that I had let my imagination get the best of me. After all, Marta had been there alone for hours, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for her to be a little jumpy. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened that I wasn't seeing. It wasn't just Marta's words. It was the way she'd said them, her voice trembling with that unmistakable fear. I'd heard that kind of fear before. It wasn't something you could fake. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened awareness, jumping at every little noise, every creak in the house. I couldn't help myself. I'd never been one to jump to conclusions, but there was an undeniable feeling that I was being watched, that someone was lurking in the corners of my life, just out of sight. I found myself constantly checking the locks on the doors, walking through the house, scanning for anything unusual, but there was nothing. Everything was as it should be. The house was still and empty, just like it always had been when no one was home. My parents were gone again, off to some social event that I had no interest in, and Jacob, as usual, was nowhere to be found. The house, now completely empty, felt even more isolating. I had to do anything to break out of this sense of dread. So I called Marta. She answered on the second ring, her voice flat, almost detached. "Emma?" she asked, as though she had been waiting for my call. It was a little unsettling. I hesitated, unsure of how to word the question that had been swirling in my mind. "Marta, I need to ask you something. When you were in the house the other day, did you notice anything strange? Anything unusual? I mean, besides the feeling of someone being there." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Marta spoke, her voice low. "I'm not sure how to explain it, Emma, but there's something about that house. It's old. I don't know how long you've lived there, but it feels like it holds onto things, like it remembers things, people." Her words were cryptic, her tone strange, and I didn't know how to respond. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and I pushed the thought aside. "Marta, what exactly do you mean by that? Are you saying the house is haunted or something?" I tried to make my voice sound light, as if I was just indulging in an offhand curiosity. Marta was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her considering how much to reveal. I didn't want to say anything before, but I felt it. The atmosphere in that house is different from others. When I clean, it's almost like the air shifts. I'm not crazy, Emma. There's something there, and I can't shake the feeling that it's watching. Her words sent a shiver through me. I couldn't tell if she was being serious or just trying to explain away her fear, but the weight of her tone made me pause. Could it be true? Could the house itself hold something, some sort of presence, a memory, a spirit? It sounded ridiculous, but as I stood there in the empty house, the silence pressing in on me, I found myself wondering if there was any truth to her claim. I had always dismissed stories like this. I wasn't someone who believed in ghosts or spirits, and I had never given much thought to things like energy or vibrations. But now, in the wake of Marta's call, I began to question my certainty. Had something in this house changed? Had I missed something? I needed to figure it out. And the only way to do that was to dig deeper. Over the next few days, I kept an eye out for anything that could explain what Marta had said. I started looking into the history of the house, hoping that the answers were buried somewhere in its past. It wasn't an old house, not by any means, only about 30 years old, but there had to be something. Maybe someone had lived here before my family, or perhaps there had been an event tied to the house that I didn't know about. I began searching through old town records, trying to find anything that could explain the strange feeling in the air. But as I dug deeper, I found only one thing that stood out: a name. It was a name that kept popping up in connection with the house. Clarence Holloway. I had never heard the name before, and when I asked my parents about it, they were strangely evasive. My mother, who usually liked to chat about family history, grew quiet when I mentioned it, and my father dismissed the name as nothing important with a wave of his hand. But that wasn't enough to dissuade me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew where the old records were kept. There was a dusty archive at the back of the local library, filled with yellowed files and forgotten town history. It was the kind of place no one bothered to visit unless they were researching something specific. I figured that if I could dig up information on Clarence Holloway, I might get a better understanding of why Marta was so freaked out. The following afternoon, I found myself at the library, tucked in a corner with a pile of old files and town records spread out in front of me. I pored over documents, cross-referencing names and dates, but it wasn't until I found a small newspaper clipping from the early 1980s that everything clicked. The headline read, "Local man disappears without a trace." The article detailed the sudden disappearance of a man named Clarence Holloway, who had lived in the house before my family. The story was vague, offering little more than the basics: a man in his mid-30s who had vanished from his home one night without leaving a trace. No signs of struggle, no messages, no explanation. The police had never solved the case, and the article speculated that Holloway had simply run off, though no one seemed to know why. There were no further details. The story was short and inconclusive, but it left me with an unsettling feeling. I couldn't help but feel like I was on the edge of something bigger. It wasn't just a missing person. The name Holloway felt familiar to me in a way I couldn't explain. My mind kept circling back to Marta's words. The house remembers things. Had something happened here, something the town had chosen to forget? Was there more to this story than anyone was letting on? I felt a sense of dread settle over me. It wasn't just that someone had disappeared in this house, it was the silence around it. No one seemed to talk about it, not even my parents, who had lived here for years. I thought back to the strange feeling I had when I first moved into the house, the feeling that something was missing, something wasn't quite right. What if it was more than just my own fears? What if the house itself was haunted, cursed even? I left the library that day with more questions than answers. The history of the house, the mysterious disappearance of Clarence Holloway, and Marta's eerie warnings had all merged into a terrifying puzzle I couldn't quite put together. As I drove home, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing. When I got home, the house felt even emptier than before. The air was thick with something I couldn't name. I felt like I was walking through a dream, each step echoing in the silence. I tried to push my fear aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as I moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And then, just as I was about to head upstairs, I heard it, a sound, a faint tapping like something or someone was knocking at the door. But when I rushed to check, there was nothing. No one outside, no one in sight. The house was still, empty. Yet in that moment, I knew something had been here, and I was no longer sure I wanted to find out what. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers, just out of reach. My curiosity, once so eager to uncover the mysteries buried in the house, had transformed into a gnawing dread. Every corner I turned, every door I opened, only led me to more questions, questions that I didn't know how to answer. It had been a week since my trip to the library, and the more I learned, the less certain I became. The house felt like it was tightening around me, and the strange sense of being watched never left. It lingered in the hallways, in the corners of rooms, in the very air I breathed. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting, that the weight of the past was simply getting to me. After all, I had no concrete evidence of anything sinister. A missing person from decades ago didn't automatically mean that the house was cursed or haunted, but there was something about the way things had been unfolding that made it hard to dismiss. First, Marta's call, and then the unsettling discovery of Clarence Holloway's disappearance. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was one I wasn't ready to see. That night, I sat in my bedroom, unable to sleep. The moonlight filtered in through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. The room, usually so comforting and familiar, felt alien now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. I couldn't ignore the feeling of something lurking just out of sight, just behind the veil of the house's stillness. The silence was oppressive, like the whole house was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the nagging thought that I needed to confront whatever was happening. I had tried to ignore it for days, but the longer I did, the worse the feeling became. I had to know the truth, even if it scared me. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the contact list until I found Marta's number. I wasn't sure why I was calling her again, maybe because she was the only one who had seen something, who had felt something. "Marta," I said when she picked up. There was a slight tremor in my voice that I couldn't hide. "Emma," her voice was slow, careful. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated. "I don't know. I've been thinking about what you said about the house, and I need to know more. I can't shake the feeling that there's something here, something I'm missing. Something's wrong." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her weighing her words. "You're not imagining things, Emma. I know how it sounds, but I've cleaned houses all my life, and I've never felt anything like this before. The energy in that house, it's different. There's something about it. I've been to homes where people have died, and sometimes you feel a weight like the air is heavy. But with your house, it's not just that. It's like the house itself is alive in a way. It's holding onto something. And it doesn't want to let go." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had tried to deny it, to tell myself that it was just an overactive imagination, but I knew deep down that Marta wasn't just saying this for drama. She believed it. And now, I was starting to believe it too. "Do you think it has something to do with Clarence Holloway?" I asked before I could stop myself. I hadn't even meant to say his name out loud, but it felt like I needed to ask. His name had been lingering in my mind for days, growing heavier with each passing hour. Marta was quiet on the other end of the line. Her silence was deafening. "I don't know," she said softly, "but it's possible. Maybe there's something in that house, something tied to him. Maybe he didn't just disappear, maybe something happened to him." My breath caught in my throat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a chill creeping down my spine. The thought that there could be a connection between Clarence and the house wasn't something I wanted to entertain, but it was becoming harder to ignore. I had already started to uncover pieces of the puzzle, each one leading me down a darker, more dangerous path. But now, with Marta's words hanging in the air between us, I couldn't deny it. Something was very wrong in this house, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face whatever it was. I need to go deeper, I said, more to myself than to Marta. I need to know what happened to him. I need to know what's really going on here. Be careful, Emma, Marta warned, her voice strained. This is bigger than you think. Once you start digging, there's no going back. I didn't respond right away. Part of me knew that she was right. Once I crossed that line, once I started uncovering the truth, there was no way to turn back. But another part of me, one that had been suffocating for so long, felt like it was finally waking up. I had spent years living in the shadows of my family's expectations, of the life that had been forced on me, and now, the thought of finally having the power to understand what was happening in my own home was intoxicating. I have to, I whispered into the phone. The line went quiet, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then, Marta sighed. I understand, just be careful. Don't trust everyone, not even your family. I hung up, feeling the weight of her words settle on me. There was so much I didn't know, so much that had been hidden from me. And now, I was beginning to understand that the house itself had secrets, secrets that stretched far beyond Clarence Holloway's disappearance. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of the guest bedroom again. The door was slightly ajar, just like it had been the day before. The room felt colder today, more oppressive. I stood in the doorway, staring into the dim light that filtered through the window. The room, once so mundane, now felt like a portal into something darker. I stepped inside, my heart racing in my chest. There was something magnetic about this room, something that drew me in and made me feel like I had no choice but to explore it. I glanced around, my eyes scanning every inch of the room. It was the same as always, nothing unusual, nothing out of place, but I knew it was. I could feel it in my bones. There was something hidden here, something that I wasn't seeing. I took a deep breath and approached the closet. It was small, barely enough room for a few hanging clothes, but it felt important. I had never paid much attention to it before, but now I couldn't ignore it. I opened the door and stared at the empty shelves. There was nothing inside, just a few old coats that had been left behind, their fabric worn and faded with age. But there, at the back of the closet, tucked behind the coats, was something that caught my eye. A small box, nearly hidden from view. I reached for it, my hands trembling. The box was old, covered in dust and cobwebs. It didn't seem like anything special, just a plain wooden box, the kind you might find at a thrift store or an antique shop. But something about it felt important. I could almost hear it calling to me, urging me to open it. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers hovering over the lid. I knew I had no choice. Whatever was inside might be the key to everything, the key to understanding what was happening in this house. I opened the box, and inside, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photograph. It was a black and white photo, old and faded, but still clear enough to see the faces of the people in it. There were 4 of them, 2 adults and 2 children. The man in the photo was tall, broad-shouldered, with a stern expression on his face. The woman beside him had soft features and dark eyes, but her face was blank, like she was lost in thought. The children were younger, barely in their teens, with innocent smiles that seemed out of place in the context of the other faces. And standing in the back, barely visible, was a figure I recognized. Clarence Holloway. My heart stopped. I stared at the photograph for what felt like an eternity. The faces in the picture blurred and shifted before my eyes, but one thing remained clear. Clarence Holloway, standing quietly in the background, watching with an unsettling stillness. His presence seemed to linger in the room, as though the photo itself had drawn him back from the past. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. How was he connected to this family? How had he ended up in the house? And why had no one, least of all my parents, ever mentioned his name before? I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck as I continued to study the image. The family was unfamiliar to me, but there was something undeniably eerie about their expressions. The children, despite their smiles, seemed almost distant. The woman's face lacked warmth, like she was caught in a moment she couldn't escape from. And Clarence, he stood there, looking like he was waiting for something, waiting for the camera to take the picture, waiting for something that would never come. I couldn't shake the feeling that this photograph was the key to everything. The house had been hiding something from me, something that had been buried under layers of dust and time. But what was it? Why had this photo been hidden in the back of the closet, tucked away in an old box, forgotten by everyone but me? The walls of the guest room seemed to close in around me, and I took a step back, my breath coming faster as I realized the significance of the discovery. This was no accident. The photo, the house, and Clarence Holloway, everything was connected. I had no idea how, but I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I was on the verge of uncovering something monumental, something that had been deliberately concealed for years. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I had to confront my parents. I had to know why they had kept all of this from me. The history of the house, Clarence's disappearance, the strange atmosphere that Marta had described, it all had to tie together somehow. And if I was going to get to the bottom of it, I couldn't do it alone. I grabbed the photograph, feeling the weight of it in my hands as I rushed downstairs. My heart thudded in my chest, and every step I took seemed to echo louder than the last. When I reached the living room, I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone and dialed my parents' number, my hands shaking as I waited for them to pick up. It rang 3 times before my father's voice came through the line, curt and distracted. "Emma, what is it? I'm in the middle of something." "Dad, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the urgency was clear in my tone. "There's something about the house, something I found." There was a brief silence before my father spoke again, this time more sharply. "What do you mean? What did you find?" I didn't hesitate. "I found a photograph. It's from before we moved in. It's got Clarence Holloway in it, and the people in the picture, there's something strange about them. Why didn't you ever tell me about this, about him?" I could hear the slight rustle of papers on the other end of the line, followed by a long, drawn-out sigh. "Emma, I don't know what you're talking about. That's ancient history. You need to leave it alone." My pulse quickened as I gripped the phone tighter. "No, Dad, I can't leave it alone. There's something happening in this house, something you've been hiding from me. I need the truth. What happened to Clarence?" The silence on the other end was heavy. My father didn't speak for a long time, and when he finally did, his voice had changed. It was quieter, softer. "It's not something you need to know about. It's in the past. I didn't want you involved in it." I felt a wave of frustration rise in me, a mixture of confusion and anger. "Why? Why wouldn't you tell me the truth? Don't I have a right to know?" "You don't understand, Emma," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Some things are better left forgotten. You don't want to know what happened. Trust me. It's better for everyone this way." The tone in his voice, the way he hesitated before speaking, told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had happened with Clarence Holloway was a dark secret, one that my father, for all his control and authority, was terrified of confronting. And for some reason, he believed that keeping it from me was for my own good. But it wasn't for my good. It was for his, to protect himself, to protect the family. I could feel my stomach twisting as I processed his words. "What happened, Dad?" I whispered. "What are you hiding?" There was another long pause. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice lower now, almost as though he were speaking to himself. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way, but Clarence wasn't who we thought he was, and when he disappeared, it wasn't just a disappearance. It was something far worse, something I can't explain over the phone. You wouldn't understand." I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information that had been thrown at me. Clarence had been a part of my family's past. He had been connected to this house, to this very land, and whatever had happened to him was tied to something darker, something that had been buried for years. I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed silent, my thoughts spinning. The air around me seemed to thicken, and I suddenly felt like the walls were closing in again. The truth was there, just out of reach, but every time I reached for it, it slipped away, leaving me with nothing but shadows. "I'm coming home, Emma," my father said suddenly, breaking the silence. "We'll talk when I get there, but you have to promise me one thing." I swallowed hard. "What?" "You have to promise me that you'll leave this alone, that you won't dig any deeper. You're better off not knowing the truth. Trust me, please." I felt the weight of his words, but I couldn't stop myself. The need to understand, to uncover the truth, had become too strong. I couldn't ignore it anymore. "I can't do that," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I need to know, Dad. I need to know what happened to Clarence. and I need to know what happened in this house." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might say something else, but then the line went quiet. The conversation was over. He was coming home, and soon, we would finally have the confrontation that I had been avoiding for so long. I hung up the phone, my heart racing in my chest. It was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was personal now. Whatever had happened to Clarence, whatever secret my father was hiding, was something I couldn't ignore. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The house, the photograph, and the strange atmosphere that had been building for weeks, it was all part of something much larger, something that I had to face. As I stood there, staring at the empty room around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was closer than I realized. The house was waiting for me to discover its secrets. And when I did, there was no going back. I didn't have to wait long for my father to return. It seemed like no time at all before I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires. My heart thudded in my chest, the pressure mounting as I prepared myself for what was to come. This was it, the confrontation I had been dreading, yet at the same time, craving. I had to face whatever my father had been hiding, whatever had been buried in the past, before it consumed me completely. I stood at the window, watching as he stepped out of his car, his posture rigid, his face set in a mask of determination. He hadn't changed much in all these years, still the same strong, commanding presence, but now something in his eyes seemed different. There was a weariness there, a haunted look that I had never noticed before. It made my stomach twist with unease. I didn't want to admit it, but I could feel it deep inside me. This was no ordinary family secret. Whatever had happened with Clarence Holloway, it wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was something that had shaken my father to his core, something he had never truly recovered from. When he walked into the house, I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. He didn't even say hello. Instead, he went straight to the living room, his eyes scanning the space as if he were looking for something or someone. I followed him in, the weight of the photograph still in my hands. The room felt colder now, the walls pressing in, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to come out. "You found the photograph, didn't you?" he said, his voice low and rough. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, as if he had known all along that this moment would come. He didn't look at me, didn't even acknowledge my presence as he stood by the fireplace, his back to me. I clenched my fists at my sides. "I did," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked at the end. "Who are they, Dad? Who are those people in the photo? And why is Clarence in it? Why didn't you ever tell me?" He turned then, slowly, his eyes dark and distant. For a moment, I thought he might walk away, but he didn't. Instead, he walked toward me, taking the photograph from my hands, his fingers lingering on the edges for a moment before he let it fall back into my grasp. "They were family," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "but not the kind of family you think of. Clarence was different. He was more than just a friend. He was someone I trusted, someone I thought I could count on." He paused, and I could see the pain in his eyes, the regret, as though the weight of that past had followed him all these years. But I was wrong. I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at him, the man I had always seen as strong and unshakable. Now I saw something else in him, vulnerability, fear. Fear of the past, fear of the secrets he had kept hidden for so long. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" I asked again, my voice barely a whisper. "What happened to him? What did you do, Dad?" His gaze hardened for a moment, as though he were trying to block out the memories that were flooding back. He looked at me as though I had asked something unspeakable, something he could never share. "It's not that simple, Emma. There are things you don't understand, things you can't understand." "I deserve to understand," I snapped, the anger rising inside me. "I've spent my whole life wondering what's wrong with this house, with our family, with everything. You've kept me in the dark for so long. I'm not a little girl anymore, Dad. I have the right to know." He sighed heavily, the weight of his guilt and shame settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. "I know you think you're ready for the truth, but you're not. The truth about Clarence. It's not something that can just be told. It's something that's been eating away at me for years. And no matter how much I wish I could undo it, I can't." I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at him, my mind racing. What had he done? What had happened all those years ago to make him this broken, this consumed by guilt? "Tell me," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. Please, I need to know." For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes were distant, lost in a memory I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. But finally, he spoke, his voice rough with the weight of the past. He was family, but he was also dangerous. We took him in when he had nowhere else to go. He was struggling, trying to get his life together. But there was always something about him, something dark, something that didn't sit right. He had this pull on people, this ability to manipulate them, to make them believe whatever he wanted them to believe. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to continue. I thought I could help him. I thought that if I gave him a chance, he'd turn his life around. But I was wrong. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. What do you mean? What happened to him? Something happened that night, something I never saw coming, he continued, his voice shaky. Clarence, he did something terrible, something unforgivable. And when I found out what it was, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't let him destroy everything, my family, my reputation, our lives. So I made a decision, a choice that haunts me every day. My heart was pounding now, my chest tight with anticipation. What did you do, Dad? He closed his eyes as if he couldn't bear to relive the memory. I made him leave. I told him to disappear. I made sure no one would ever find him. I thought I was protecting you, protecting our family. But I didn't realize that what I was doing was destroying something far worse. Clarence wasn't just some guy we could get rid of. He was tangled up in things I didn't understand. The room seemed to close in on me as I processed his words. My mind was spinning, trying to grasp what he was saying. You made him disappear, I whispered, feeling the weight of the words. You didn't call the police? You didn't tell anyone? I couldn't, he said, his voice low and filled with regret. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I kept it quiet, if I made him vanish, no one would have to know the truth. But I was wrong. We can't run from the past, Emma. It always catches up with us. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my father, was crumbling. The man I had trusted, the man I had looked up to for so long, was the one who had buried this dark secret. He wasn't the protector I had imagined him to be. He was just as flawed, just as capable of making mistakes as anyone else. But why did you hide it from me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? His gaze softened as he looked at me, but there was something resigned in his expression. Because I couldn't bear for you to know. I thought if you didn't know, you'd be safe. But I see now. I see that keeping this from you was the biggest mistake of all. I felt sick. Sick with the realization that my whole life had been built on a lie, that my father's fear and guilt had been the foundation of everything I had known. I had been living in a house full of secrets, a house that had been tainted by something dark, something that no one had been willing to confront. For a long moment, I stood there, staring at my father, the photograph still clutched tightly in my hands. My mind was reeling, the weight of the truth settling heavily on my chest. I had asked for the truth, but now that I had it, I didn't know how to move forward. How could I ever look at my family the same way again? I don't know what to say, Dad, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix anything, he said softly, his voice filled with sorrow. You just have to understand. That's all I can ask for. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that understanding wasn't enough. That understanding didn't erase the years of lies, the years of living in fear. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I just stood there, holding the photograph in my hands, feeling the weight of everything I had just learned. The truth was more than I had ever expected, and yet it was only the beginning. The silence that hung between us after my father's confession was suffocating, as if the very air in the room had thickened, absorbing the weight of everything he had just revealed. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the stranger standing before me, someone who had made a choice so dark that it had destroyed everything in its path, and now, years later, it was unraveling. I wasn't sure what to say. I wanted to scream, to demand more answers, to tell him how much his betrayal had hurt me. But somehow, I found myself frozen in place. The room felt smaller, and every shadow seemed to whisper of things left unsaid, of guilt that had festered too long to be ignored. It wasn't just Clarence's disappearance that haunted this house. It was my father's role in it, the way he had chosen to bury it all rather than confront the truth. And by doing so, he had not only betrayed Clarence, but also our family and most of all me. For years, I had assumed that everything was fine, that the silence in the house was normal, that the strange feeling of unease that I could never explain was just something I had made up in my own mind. But now, I realized that I wasn't imagining things. The house wasn't just empty, it was haunted by the weight of secrets too heavy to bear, and my father had been the one to keep them buried, for his own peace of mind, at the cost of my own. I swallowed hard, trying to push past the lump in my throat. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked again, this time more quietly, my voice cracking with the weight of emotion I couldn't hold back. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth? I had the right to know." My father sighed, his shoulders slumping as he turned away from me, walking toward the window. He didn't answer immediately, and I could tell by the way he stood there, staring out at the garden, that the truth was more than just a mistake. It was a burden he had carried alone for far too long. And now, it was mine to bear too. "I didn't want to drag you into this mess, Emma," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to carry the weight of it. You were just a child, and I thought you were better off not knowing. But now I see I was wrong. I see how much I've hurt you by keeping you in the dark. I feel like everything been a lie," I whispered, my voice trembling with the depth of the betrayal. "How am I supposed to move forward, knowing all of this? Knowing that you were willing to protect yourself at the cost of everything else?" He turned back toward me, his face pained, as if my words had struck him deeper than any accusation. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his voice thick with regret. "But I couldn't fix it. I couldn't undo what I had done." I felt a coldness creep over me as the truth settled in. The house, the family, everything had been built on lies. I had spent my whole life under the illusion of normalcy, of a safe, stable family, but it was all a facade. And now that the mask had been pulled away, all I could see were the cracks beneath the surface. "Where is he, Dad?" I asked, my voice tight, though I wasn't sure if I really wanted to know the answer. What happened to Clarence? Was he really just erased? My father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to me, his eyes searching my face, as though he were weighing whether or not I could handle the full truth. "Clarence didn't just disappear, Emma," he said quietly. "He wasn't the same person when he left. He had changed. Something inside him snapped, and he did something unforgivable. He hurt people. And when I realized just how far he had gone, I knew I couldn't let him stay. I couldn't let him destroy everything, so I made him leave." "But you didn't call the police?" I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You didn't report him, you just made him disappear. What kind of person does that, Dad?" He flinched at my words, but he didn't argue. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was protecting the family. I never imagined that it would come to this, that it would all unravel like this." I shook my head, feeling the anger and confusion swirl inside me. "You didn't protect anyone. You've been hiding from the truth for years, and now it's destroying us. This house, it's full of it. The lies, the guilt, the things we're all too afraid to face." I could see my father's face harden, the walls he had spent years building around himself slowly rising again. He was retreating, pulling back into himself, unwilling to face the full scope of the mess he had made. "I never wanted you to be a part of it," he muttered, his voice becoming distant again. "I never wanted you to know. It's too much. It's too much for anyone to bear." But I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after everything I had learned, everything that had been hidden from me for so long. I wasn't going to let him shut me out again. "You can't keep running, Dad," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and sorrow. "You can't keep pretending like it never happened. I deserve to know the truth, all of it." He didn't respond, but I could see the struggle in his eyes. He wanted to protect me, to keep me safe from the darkness of the past, but in doing so, he had only pushed me further away. And now, I was standing on the edge of something far bigger than either of us could have imagined. I turned away from him then, my hands clenched into fists at my sides as I tried to steady my breathing. The house around me felt alive, its walls closing in once again, suffocating me with the weight of everything I had just uncovered. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. It was never okay. "Do you hear that?" I said suddenly, my voice sharp. "The house, it's not empty, is it?" My father looked at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know how to explain it," I said, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. "But it's like It's like the house is alive. It's holding something inside. And every time I think I understand it, I realize I don't. For a moment, there was silence. Then my father's eyes softened, and he stepped toward me, his voice low and hesitant. "You're not wrong. The house has always been different. It's been a part of us, and we've been a part of it. But I've kept you from the truth, Emma, and I can't do that anymore. It's time to face what's been buried." I turned to face him, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, I realized that it wasn't just the house that was haunted, it was us. Our family, our lives, all of it was built on a foundation of lies, and now we were all paying the price. And somehow, I knew that even though my father had tried to protect me, even though he had shielded me from the darkness, I was the one who had to face it now. I had to confront the truth about my family, about this house, and about the choices we had all made. There was no turning back. "I need to go," I said quietly, my voice steady for the first time in what felt like days. "I need to figure this out. I need to understand what really happened." My father's eyes flickered with something, regret, perhaps, or fear, but he didn't stop me. Instead, he nodded silently, as if he understood that this was something I had to do on my own. As I walked toward the door, the photograph still clutched in my hands, I knew that my life was about to change forever. The truth had come at a cost, but it was the only way forward. And no matter how much it hurt, I had to face it. For myself, for my family. I stepped outside, the cold air hitting my face, and I knew, deep in my bones, that this was just the beginning.